An 81-year-old man is walking along a dirt road outside Baxter, Tennessee, at 6:40 a.m. on a Saturday in March, the way he does every morning because his wife died 4 years ago, and the walk is the only thing that makes the first hour of the day bearable. He finds a dog in a drainage ditch. The dog is barely alive. 125 pounds of white and brindle Akita lying on his side in 3 inches of standing water. Ribs moving, but just barely. The man is 5'9" and weighs 158 pounds. He kneels in the ditch, lifts the dog onto his back, and walks home, 1.25 miles, uphill for the last third, with a dying animal across his shoulders. The vet says the dog has a 15% chance. The man says he'll take it. 2 years later, that dog will start pressing his nose against the man's stomach every night. And the man will ignore it for 3 weeks because he thinks the dog is just being affectionate. He's wrong. The dog is smelling something growing inside him that no scan has found yet. The dog didn't have a name when Frank Barlow found him. He was lying in the runoff ditch along Cummins Mill Road, half submerged, his white coat stained brown from the mud. His head was above water, barely, resting on a rock that kept his muzzle clear. His eyes were open but unfocused, the pupils dilated, the amber irises clouded at the edges. He was an Akita, thick double coat, curled tail, though the tail was limp now, floating in the water like a rope someone had dropped. Broad skull with small triangular ears that were folded flat. His paws were the size of a man's palm. When Frank crouched beside the ditch, he could hear the dog breathing. A wet, ragged sound, like someone pulling a damp cloth through a narrow pipe. There was no collar, no tags. A gash on his left flank, 8 inches long, deep enough to show muscle, crusted with mud and something darker. The wound was at least 3 days old. The edges had started to curl. His back legs weren't moving. His front legs twitched when Frank's shadow fell across him, but that was the only response. He smelled like ditch water and blood and the sweet rotting smell of tissue that's starting to give up. Frank was 81, retired machinist, 42 years at the same shop in Cookville until his hands started shaking too much for the tolerances. His wife, Helen, had died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the morning she didn't wake up. They'd been married 56 years. Frank still kept her pillow on the bed, still made coffee for 2 every morning and poured 1 cup down the sink, still set the table with 2 placemats. He knew these habits were strange. He did them anyway because stopping felt like agreeing that she was gone, and he wasn't ready to agree. Frank's morning walk was 3 miles. Out Cummins Mill Road to the old covered bridge, then back. Helen used to walk with him. Now he walked alone, 6:30 a.m. every day, rain or cold or August heat. His son, Michael, 47, a pharmacist in Nashville, called every Sunday and asked how he was doing. Frank always said fine. Michael always said, "Dad, you're 81 and you live alone on a dirt road." Frank always said, "I know where I live, Michael." Frank looked at the dog in the ditch. The dog looked at nothing. His breathing was slowing, the intervals between inhales getting longer, the exhales getting shallower. Frank had seen that breathing before. He'd sat beside Helen's bed for 3 days listening to it. He knew what it meant. He didn't think about it. He stepped into the ditch. The water came to his shins. Cold, March cold, the kind that makes your bones ache before your skin registers it. He knelt beside the dog and slid his arms under the body. The dog didn't resist. He didn't have enough left to resist. Frank lifted 125 pounds of wet fur and muscle and damage and got the dog across his shoulders in a firefighter carry, the way his father had taught him when he was 17 and working summers at the volunteer fire department. 1.25 miles. The last third was uphill. A slow grade, maybe 5%. But 5% with 125 pounds across your shoulders and knees that hadn't been right since 2014 felt like climbing a wall. Frank's lower back seized at the half-mile mark. His left knee popped at the 3/4 mark. Not a crack, a pop, the kind that means something shifted and decided to stay shifted. He could feel the dog's heartbeat against the back of his neck. Faint, irregular, like a clock that keeps losing time. The dog's blood mixed with the ditch water and ran down Frank's shirt, warm at first, then cold as the air hit it. Frank walked through his front door at 7:18 a.m. He set the dog on the kitchen floor, on the rug Helen had bought at a craft fair in Smithville in 2009. He sat down in the chair next to the table and didn't move for 5 minutes. His arms were trembling. His shirt was soaked through with water and blood. The dog was lying on Helen's rug, breathing those long, terrible intervals, eyes open, seeing nothing. Frank called the only vet open on a Saturday morning, Dr. Linda Harwell, who ran a mixed animal practice out of a converted barn on Highway 56. She told him to bring the dog in. Frank looked at the dog on the floor. He looked at his car in the driveway. He called his neighbor, Ray Draper, 68, who had a truck with a tailgate that dropped flat. Ray came in 9 minutes. They lifted the dog onto a moving blanket and slid him into the truck bed. Ray didn't ask questions. He just drove. Dr. Harwell was direct. Severe dehydration. The flank wound was infected, cellulitis spreading into the surrounding tissue, 3 fractured ribs on the right side, likely from a vehicle impact, possible internal bleeding. At a core temperature 94.8 degrees, normal for a dog is 101 to 102.5. He was hypothermic, septic, and shutting down. Mr. Barlow, I'm going to be honest with you. This dog has maybe a 15% chance. Treatment is IV fluids, antibiotics, wound debridement, possibly surgery if there's internal damage. You're looking at $1,800 to $2,500, and there's a strong possibility he doesn't make it through the weekend. Frank looked at the dog on the exam table. The dog's eyes were closed now. His breathing had evened out slightly. The IV was already working, pulling him back from the edge by millimeters. He made it to the rock, Frank said. Dr. Harwell looked at him. In the ditch. His head was on a rock. The water was 3 inches deep, and he got his head on the rock so he wouldn't drown. He problem-solved while he was dying. Frank looked at Dr. Harwell. Give him the 15%. Frank named him Sho, short for Shohei, a Japanese name Helen had once said she liked years ago during a PBS documentary about Akitas. Frank had remembered. He'd remembered a lot of things Helen said. They were easier to keep than the things he'd said back. Michael called on Sunday. Frank told him about the dog. There was a long silence. Dad, you carried a 125-pound animal a mile on your back. You're 81. Your knees are shot. You could have thrown out your back, fallen, hit your head. I didn't. You're spending $2,000 on a dog the vet said probably won't make it. She said 15%. That's not good odds, Dad. It's not no odds either. Michael didn't push it further, but when he called the next Sunday and the one after that, he asked about the dog first. Frank noticed. Sho survived the weekend, then the week. Dr. Harwell cleaned the flank wound twice and closed it with 17 stitches. The infection responded to antibiotics. The ribs would heal on their own. By week 3, Sho was standing. By week 5, he was walking, slow, stiff, favoring his right side, but walking. His coat dried and the white came back, pure, almost luminous, with brindle patches across his back and hindquarters like brushstrokes. His eyes cleared. The amber came through, deep, steady, the color of old honey. He was bigger than Frank had realized in the ditch. Standing, his head reached Frank's hip. His tail uncurled for the first time on day 22, and when it curled back up, it curled tight, a proper Akita curl, carried high over his back like a flag. Sho was quiet, not trained quiet, inherently quiet, and the way Akitas are. He didn't bark at the mailman. He didn't bark at deer in the yard. He walked beside Frank on the morning route, Cummins Mill Road to the covered bridge and back, at exactly Frank's pace, his shoulder level with Frank's thigh. When Frank stopped, Sho stopped. When Frank sat on the bench at the bridge, Sho sat beside him, facing the opposite direction, watching the tree line, like a sentry covering the flank his person couldn't see. Sho had 3 rituals. Every morning at 6:25 a.m., 5 minutes before Frank's alarm, he stood at the bedroom door and exhaled once, long and warm, the way he'd breathed in the ditch, except now it was steady, controlled, the exhale of something that had decided to stay. Every evening at 6 p.m., when Frank sat in Helen's recliner, he'd switched from his own chair without deciding to. Sho lay on Helen's rug and put his chin on Frank's foot, not the armrest, the foot, like he was anchoring Frank to the floor. And every night, after Frank turned off the lights, Sho walked through the house, kitchen, living room, hallway, front door, back door, checking each one, then returned to the bedroom and lay across the doorway. Ray Draper came by for coffee on Saturday mornings, a habit that started after the ditch and never stopped. He'd sit at the kitchen table and watch Sho lying on the rug and say, "That dog was dead when we put him in my truck." Frank would say, "He was on the rock." Ray would shake his head and drink his coffee. One morning, Ray said, "Helen would have liked him." Frank didn't answer. He just put his hand on Sho's head and left it there. 18 months in. A Tuesday night in September. Frank was in the recliner, watching the news. Sho was on the rug. Then Sho stood up, walked to Frank, and pressed his nose against Frank's stomach. Not a nuzzle. A press. Firm, deliberate, nostrils flaring. He held it for 5 seconds. Then he pulled back, looked at Frank, and did it again. Frank pushed him away gently. "Cut it out." Sho did it again the next night. And the next. Every evening, between 6:15 and 6:30, he'd walk to Frank, press his nose against the left side of Frank's abdomen, hold it, pull back, hold it again. Frank thought it was affection, an Akita thing, a phase. After a week, he stopped pushing Sho away and just let him do it. By week 3, Sho added a new behavior. And he started pressing his nose against Frank's stomach in the morning, too, during coffee at 6:35 a.m., while Frank sat at the kitchen table. Same spot, left side, same deliberate pressure, and he'd started whining afterward, a single, quiet whine, barely audible, that he'd never made before. Frank mentioned it to Dr. Harwell during Sho's annual checkup. "He's been pushing his nose into my stomach every day, same spot, twice a day now, and he whines after." Dr. Harwell was checking Sho's flank scar. She stopped. "Same spot every time?" "Left side, yeah." "How long?" 3 weeks, maybe." Dr. Harwell looked at Frank. "Mr. Barlow, I want you to see your doctor this week. It's a dog being a dog. Dogs don't fixate on the same spot on someone's body for 3 weeks without a reason. Especially not Akitas. They don't do anything without a reason." She paused. "Please." Frank went to his GP on Thursday. Dr. Watts did a physical. Nothing remarkable. Frank was about to leave when he mentioned the dog. Dr. Watts ordered an abdominal ultrasound, just to be thorough. The ultrasound found a mass on Frank's left kidney, 2 centimeters. The CT confirmed it. Renal cell carcinoma, stage 1, contained, no metastasis. The urologist in Cookville said, "This is the earliest I've ever caught one. At your age, with something this small, we have excellent options. If this had gone another 6 months, maybe 8, we'd be having a very different conversation." Frank sat in the urologist's office at 10:40 a.m. on a Tuesday, wearing the shirt he'd worn to Helen's funeral because it was the only button-down he still owned. Yes, and he looked at the scan on the screen, the small white shape on his kidney, the thing that had been growing inside him while he walked 3 miles every morning and drank coffee and watched the news and thought he was fine. And he understood what Sho had been doing. The dog hadn't been nuzzling him. He'd been telling him. Every press of the nose, every whine, the same spot twice a day for 3 weeks. 300 million olfactory receptors pointed at a tumor the size of a marble, screaming in the only language he had. Frank drove home. He walked into the kitchen. Sho was on Helen's rug. Frank lowered himself to the floor, knees cracking, back protesting, the same body that had carried 125 pounds up a dirt road 2 years ago, and sat beside the dog. He put his hand on Sho's neck. Sho pressed his head against Frank's chest. Frank's jaw tightened and his eyes went wet, but he didn't make a sound. He just sat there, on the rug Helen bought in Smithville, holding the dog he'd pulled from a ditch, the dog who'd just pulled him from something worse. He called Michael that evening. "I need to tell you something." He told him about the tumor, then he told him about Sho. Michael was quiet for a long time. "Dad," Michael said. His voice was different, stripped, no professional calm, no pharmacist's composure. "You're telling me the dog knew. He's been pressing his nose on the exact spot for 3 weeks. The exact spot. Left side, every time." Michael didn't say anything for 12 seconds. Then, "I'll be there Saturday." The surgery was in October, partial nephrectomy. They took the tumor and a margin of healthy tissue, 45 minutes. that Frank was home in 3 days. When he walked through the front door, Sho was standing in the kitchen, tail curled high, and he walked to Frank and pressed his nose against Frank's stomach. Same spot. Then he pulled back. He didn't do it again. Not that evening, not the next morning, not ever again. The thing he'd been smelling was gone. Today, Sho is 5, 131 pounds. The flank scar is a pale line under his white coat. You can only see it if you part the fur. Frank is 83. The kidney is clear. 18 months of clean scans. They still walk Cummins Mill Road every morning at 6:30. Sho still sits beside him at the covered bridge, facing the other way, watching the tree line. Michael drives down from Nashville every other weekend now, instead of just calling. The first time he came after the surgery, he sat on the porch with Frank, and Sho walked over and put his head in Michael's lap. Michael put his hand on Sho's skull and didn't move it for a long time. He said, "I told you 15% wasn't good odds." Frank said, "I told you it wasn't no odds." Michael laughed. The kind of laugh that's mostly air, the kind that comes after you've been holding your breath for weeks. Ray Draper still comes Saturdays. He brings a dog biscuit now. He still says, "That dog was dead when we put him in my truck." Frank doesn't argue. He just pours the coffee. Frank stopped pouring Helen's cup down the sink 6 months ago. He hadn't planned to stop. One morning, he just made 1 cup instead of 2. He stood at the counter and looked at the single mug and waited to feel guilty. He didn't. Thus, he felt like a man with 1 cup of coffee and a dog at his feet, and a kidney that was clean because an animal he pulled from a ditch had spent 3 weeks trying to tell him something, and he'd finally listened. Helen's pillow is still on the bed. Her recliner is still his favorite chair. The rug from Smithville is still on the kitchen floor, and Sho is still on the rug every evening at 6 p.m., with his chin on Frank's foot, anchoring him to the floor, to the house, to the life he almost didn't have twice. Once in a ditch, and once in a kidney, and both times because someone decided that 15% was enough.